The story begins by telling that several hundred years ago there was a war between all of the humans and monsters in the world. The war lasted for over 100 years and all of them fought for so long that by the end of it they don't even remember what they were fighting for. So when the war finally ended they decide that since they don't even know the reason they were fighting they should just live in peace instead. And just like that, peace between humans and monsters is established. Several years later, a human Dr. Glenn Litbeit and his half-snake assistant Saphentite are two doctors specializing in treating monsters. Both of them are extremely proficient doctors, however Dr. Glenn is a bit too serious in his profession. The man doesn't care to what lengths he has to go in order to get his patients healthy. After checking for lumps on a lady minotaur's bare chest, Glenn declares that the woman was actually sick because she was pregnant. After finishing up with the checkups at his clinic, Glenn receives a letter from his master Dr. Cthulhu, who tells him to visit the nearby arena so that he can check up on her patients while she is away. Cthulhu is actually a half-human half-octopus woman who is also a famous doctor in the region. While Glenn is excited to help out his master, Sapphee is not too happy. She has a crush on Glenn and doesn't like him getting attached to his female patients, and Glenn always has a lot of female patients. When the two doctors reach the arena they find out that the patients are female athletes who compete in the tournaments in the arena. One of these patients is Tysalia, a centaur who is the sole heiress of Scythia transportation. As Glenn proceeds to examine Tysalia he realizes that she has nothing wrong with her and is perfectly fine. Glenn gives her to leave and proceeds to check his other patients. After the whole day's work is done, however, just as they are leaving, Glenn is confronted by two of Tysalia's attendants. Kay and Lorna approach Glenn concerned. They tell them that there must surely be something wrong with Tysalia since she hadn't won a single match in the arena for the last month now. They explain that she was extremely talented and also worked very hard, so it was off for her to be losing so many matches. But Glenn is perfectly sure that Tysalia is alright. However, in order to re-evaluate his conclusion, he goes to one of her matches. Tysalia loses one again to a catwoman, and this time Glenn realizes what the issue was. That evening as Tysalia is practicing for the next match, Glenn and two attendants approach her and apprehend her. Saphentite restraining the princess centaur in a really uncomfortable and inappropriate way. Glenn manages to put on some iron hooves onto Tysalia's feet. She had been very full of her royal heritage and had refrained from using iron hooves, which is why her balance was off and she was losing the match. Tysalia is pretty angry at them for interfering, but immediately the next day she wins a match at the stadium after 10 consecutive defeats. You all are probably wondering how a snake monster and a regular human became friends and colleagues. It turns out that during the war Saphentite was brought into Glenn's family as a hostage so that her family wouldn't go back on the deal they had made with the humans. During this time the two became really good friends until when the war was over and she was returned back to her home. Later, by fortune or by luck, the two ended up going to the same college of medicine and reconnected once more. One day, Glenn and Saphentite go shopping on the Marrow waterways. The whole city is basically a copy of Venice and is built over a large body of water. They have to travel through the town in boat. Saphentite, who is clearly in love with Glenn, is very happy that they came together for shopping, but for Glenn this is nothing but a short trip to get some supplies. Just as the two get to the shop, right outside, a mermaid lady starts calling them a cute couple and calls them towards her. Saphentite is excited by her calling them lovers and forces Glenn to take her to the mermaid. The mermaid Lulala turns out to be a singer who sings for lovers and people who pay her to. Glenn, realizing something wrong, requests a song but only pays her 2 copper coins instead of 3, offering her a free checkup instead of the 3rd copper coin. Just as Glenn predicted, the girl cannot complete the entire song and starts coughing midway through. However, it turns out that she had some sort of disease. Glenn diagnoses her and notices blisters inside her mouth. Glenn then proceeds to check the mermaid's gills in the lewdest way possible. Anyways, he finds out that Lulala was spending too much time outside of water, which is why she had been suffering from inflammation of her gills and was unable to perform better outside of water. Lulala tells them that since her father had gone missing, she was forced to work 12 hours a day and was unable to spend much time in the water. Just then a human boy falls into the river, and midway through their conversation, Lulala jumps in to save the kid. By the time she comes out with the kid, she has the doctor give the kid CPR. Lulala slips into the water once more. She begins drowning. Upon realizing this, Glenn jumps into the water to save Lulala, kissing her to force air into her body, making her gills work again. The two of them are then rescued by Saphentite, who uses her long tail to pull them out of the water. Some days later, it turns out that Lulala is just fine now. She has even gotten a job in the city council hall in Marrow Waterways and gets to sing there every day, earning her more than enough money for her family. After all the guild testing that Glenn had done, Lulala appears to have developed a crush on the doctor. Somewhere in Marrow Waterways, a woman is seen chasing some bandits. She chases the men around the streets when suddenly she gets ambushed. The next day, after Glenn and Saphentite finish treating a slime girl, they are approached by Lady Scatty and her bodyguard, Kanai. Scatty is a half-dragon half-human girl while her servant, according to her, is a human golem made from several hundred parts of humans mixed together. She was basically a Frankenstein's monster. Scatty spoke in a real low voice and so Kanai spoke for her. Basically, the fight that happened last night was between Kanai and some bandits, and during this fight she had lost an arm. Scatty wanted the doctor to find her arm and attach it back together. Immediately when Scatty leaves, Kanai refuses Glenn's help. She has had a fair share of doctors in her life who seem to have given her plenty of bad memories, so she hates doctors in general. She tells Glenn to stay away from her and that she will look for her hands on her own. Once again, as Kanai walks the streets, she realizes that the same bandits who had ambushed her were also there and decides to follow them. She gets ambushed once more, this time losing a leg instead. Glenn goes out looking for Kunai's arm when he runs into Taisalia, who finds Kunai's leg. Glenn starts examining the leg and realizes that the stitches that were made in the leg were actually made by amateurs. Glenn thinks that perhaps the people who had made her were not even doctors at all. He then heads further into town where he runs into Lulala, who has Kunai's arm. She hands the arm to the doctor and tells him that perhaps he could use the hand and leg that he had acquired to find its owners. Elsewhere, Kanai drags herself to a nearby wall. She is a bit too frustrated for losing both her leg and her arm, however that was never her issue. Her main problem was that she could still hear the voices of all the people whose body parts were used to create her. Glenn finds her struggling and despite her protests, insists that he wants to reattach her parts. The doctor puts on his glasses and not only stitches back her body parts but also attaches all of the blood vessels properly throughout her body, explaining to her that this was probably causing the voices in her head since she didn't feel the body parts as her own. Like every other patient till now, Kanai also gets suspiciously aroused while she gets her treatment from the doctor. After Glenn is finished, Kanai thanks him despite her hate for doctors believing that Glenn is something different. Back at the clinic, one of Saphentite's drinking buddies finds a harpy egg and leaves it with her. Saphentite tries to pull and prank and tell the doctor that she was pregnant, but Glenn is too hard to fool when it comes to any form of medical information. Saphentine reveals that she was actually hiding an abandoned harpy egg that was given by one of her friends. Her friend had told her that she had found the egg abandoned in the street. Glenn then tries to examine the egg and finds that it was actually an unfertilized egg. Just then several bandits approach the clinic and attack it directly from the main door. All of the bandits are regular humans and it doesn't really take much for Saphentite to make quick work of the ones that had attacked them. When more bandits start arriving, the two doctors quickly rush outside and run into Kanai. She explains that the bandits were actually slavers who had been capturing harpy birds and making them lay eggs and selling those eggs to the highest and filthiest bidders on the black market. The doctors ask for the city council's protection, but everyone is busy with their mission of taking down the slavers at the moment, so they have no choice but to join Kanai on the mission. Scatty and Lulala also join them on the waterways. Lulala had been given the job in the city council so she could help out undercover, and this was her first ever mission. Suddenly they are attacked by archers, but fortunately for them Taisalia was nearby and she fights them off. As Kanai and Taisalia deal with the bandits on the outside, the doctors rush in alongside Scatty and find the harpies that were captured by the bandits. All of them seem to be fine, however, one of the harpies has an impacted egg from stress. Scatty and Saphentite decide that Glenn should work on the harpy to save her while they fight off any approaching bandits. Glenn immediately goes to work and helps the clearly uncomfortable harpy try and deliver the egg without it causing any complications. As Saphentite fights off the approaching bandits, she remembers the time back when they were children and how her family had actually chosen her as a hostage so that she could assassinate Glenn's entire family if the deal went wrong with the humans. Just as the egg is delivered safe and sound, Saphentite gets struck by a knife dipped in poison and she passes out mid-battle. Sapphee awakens soon, however, as the slavers didn't use poison strong enough for a literal monster. Glenn explains the slavers were arrested and the harpy laid her egg safely. After hearing that everything had worked out for the better, Saphentite decides to admit the truth to Glenn, but in return he reveals that he actually knew already about Saphentite's plan, as even his family had done some really intense background research about her when she had arrived at their place. Despite knowing that she was there to kill them, Glenn had decided to be her friend. This makes Saphentite so happy that she rips her clothes and attempts to seduce him, but before she could go on further and turn this into a demonetized video, she passes out. Once again, Dr. Cthulhu asks her 2 apprentices to go ahead and visit the Harpies town to provide medical attention to the locals there. Tysalia, who appears to have decided on marrying Glenn, offers her help to transport them to the village herself. As she drags their carriage through the mountains, a rockslide suddenly occurs. Kay and Lorna jump in to save their mistress, and Kay ends up injuring herself. Glenn quickly comes out to give some medical attention, but Kay cannot walk at all. Fortunately, some male harpies arrive just in time and take Kay to their village by air, while the rest of the group gets there as well. At the village, the super Dr. Glenn gets to check the injury properly and finds out that it's only a mirror sprain that will go away after a few days of rest. After treating the centaur, Glenn still doesn't get any rest. Pretty much every single person in the village has one issue or another and shows up at the temporary clinic that they establish there. After finishing the day's checkups, Glenn goes out for some fresh air and meets up with Lorna, who seems a bit out of place. She tells him that she was there with Tysalia, but her mistress is nowhere near. Due to Kay's injury, she has become extremely distracted and had also almost ruined Tysalia's negotiations to employ the Harpies as air couriers. Worried about her attendant, Tysalia goes to Glenn and asks him to examine Lorna. Glenn struggles to know where to start, as Lorna doesn't have any physical ailments and rather suffers from a psychological issue. He discusses the issue with Saphentite, who tells him that perhaps Lorna has a domination complex and needs to be controlled so that she feels safe and comfortable. In an attempt to heal the centaur, Glenn then pulls out a trick straight from one of the felonies books of assault, tying her up from head to toe and blindfolding her as well. Surprisingly, Lorna immediately feels better as she is more able to focus on her job. Glenn privately thinks Lorna might simply enjoy being tied up. As thanks, Kay and Lorna try to seduce Glenn together. The 2 ladies tell Glenn that their mistress wished to marry him, and if she did so, they were also his property. The 2 of them forget all boundaries and try pressuring Glenn into sleeping with them, but Glenn is quick to refuse. Kay and Lorna, however, still hope Glenn becomes their master as well one day. But that's the end of this video. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you won't miss next videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll say you later. Have a great day.